Point-and-click games were once a major genre, and Full Throttle remains one of its best remembered titles. But beyond motorcycle gangs and a story about corporate interests, there is a message about new technologies that leads to a surprisingly current conversation. How much can certain conveniences actually hurt the experiences they are meant to improve? More than that, what do we really lose when a technology becomes obsolete? The game's protagonist, Ben, initially seems like a guy who's simply attached to an old technology. In that story, wheeled vehicles are being replaced by hover cars, and Ben is literally disgusted by them. What he's really into is riding alongside the other polecats. But that attachment isn't just a matter of personal taste. There was a small world built around the motorcycle that helps explain it. The bike isn't merely Ben's means of transportation, it's the organizing element of an entire reality. It's through riding that Ben and the rest of his gang find a bond. That bond creates friendship and a sense of belonging. Social codes emerge from it. As they ride, they go through stories and create memories. The encounter with Father Torque illustrates just how deep that shared past runs. The roads are the main stage for a bold, defiant way of life. The Corley Motors factory, manufacturer of the models ridden by Ben and others, is what he calls holy ground. Under different circumstances, visiting it would be a ritual, part of a pilgrimage. Much of what revolves around this world, especially the personal relationships, could exist without the bikes, but their existence acts like a conductor, bringing all these elements together into a specific harmony with an identity that couldn't exist without them. In the background of its story, Full Throttle shows us a clash between emerging trends and older ways of doing things. The Polecats and the other biker gangs have a decidedly non-utilitarian view of riding on two wheels. The small world we mentioned before is what drives them. In the story, there was an attempt to make Corley Motors abandon motorcycle production and start manufacturing hover minivans instead. The contrast could hardly be more emblematic. On one side, there are loud motorcycles, not particularly comfortable, jolting over every imperfection in the road, leaving the biker exposed to sun and rain, and naturally more dangerous. On the other side, a minivan with better sound insulation, comfortable seats floating above the road and ignoring imperfections, while offering greater protection to everyone inside. Efficiency seems to be entirely on the minivan's side. But first, we have to ask what aspect of efficiency we are actually measuring. For a motorcyclist, the feeling of balancing on a bike with the wind in his face can matter as much as, or more than, reaching the destination. The stops, the friends, even the curves in the road are all part of what defines the journey. To understand this, we need to distinguish between different kinds of friction. Let's divide them into instrumental and constitutive. Instrumental friction is anything that can be removed without impoverishing the goal itself. Things like waiting in the line, searching several different stores for something. For most people, removing it is an advantage. Constitutive friction is a difficulty that forms part of the experience we value, and motorcycle trips provide excellent examples. The wind messing up your hair as you ride, the greater physical effort compared with driving a car. These things intensify the experience to the point that without them, what remains becomes something different. The two shouldn't be confused, and I don't think we should romanticize inconvenience. But we do need to understand the personal interpretation behind each one. Friction isn't always an obstacle. Sometimes it's an essential part of what gives certain things they value. The point is to avoid both mistakes, removing something essential to the experience or preserving something that is merely an annoyance. New technologies tend to gain ground much more through practice than through argument. The logical case is almost always more elaborate on the side of the enthusiasts of older things, even if that logic itself carries plenty of emotion. And there is nothing wrong with that. Streaming services are probably the best example of this. They have massive adoption, catalogs far too large to ever consume completely, and relatively low costs. Almost no one stops to ask themselves why they subscribe to a few of them. The convenience is simply accepted without anyone needing to hear a thesis about progress. On the other hand, the criticisms of these services are valid. Ownership as we know it doesn't exist. What we get is access conditioned on a login and password. Digital media can't be lent to someone else or sold after we're done with it. And yet, the trend seems irreversible, with convenience probably explaining most of it. Even without thinking too much about the issue, we can rationally recognize these losses and still consider them outweighed by the advantages. Buying something without leaving home, having instant access to a catalog that a physical store could never hold, all of this shapes our perception. Here's a small spoiler that shouldn't bother anyone who still intends to play the game. At one point, to cross a canyon where the bridge has been destroyed, Ben needs to use a part called a hoverlift. With it, Ben's motorcycle can float just enough to keep from falling as he reaches the other side. The irony is that he gets this part from one of the very hover vehicles he despises. Without it, however, he would never make it in time. It's a small example of how it's difficult not to recognize the virtues of the side that isn't yours. There is a dynamic of gains and losses, filtered through personal priorities, and they appear at different times. The gains are immediate, the losses are often noticed only later. The old model survives as a niche, sustained by the small world it creates for those who appreciate it. Its future, however, remains uncertain. There was a very interesting overlap in all of this, almost as if the game were making a self-reference from the future. Point-and-click games are essentially a small niche today. They went from being a major genre with productions involving figures like Steven Spielberg to being largely confined to indie games. The experience these games offered was very specific and perhaps too frustrating for part of today's audience. You would examine the same room several times, go through the same inventory again and again, try different combinations, leave, come back, repeat conversations until suddenly something clicked. The answer to the puzzle appeared, and you could finally move forward. Usually, one of two thoughts followed. Of course, that was it. How didn't I see it before? Or, there was no way I was ever going to figure it out that logically. The first is a strange, constitutive friction that enhances the game. The second gets some indulgence for nostalgia, but it's still a flaw, and it would probably change our perception if it were the dominant experience. The overlap I'm talking about is that Full Throttle is itself a Corley Motors motorcycle, an old way of doing something that gave way to successors that were more convenient or simply friendlier to a broader audience. Even its best known planned sequel, Hell on Wheels, was already a game with completely different mechanics and a new art style. The future of the franchise remains murky. Gaming today is more convenient, highlighted interactive objects, hints, many checkpoints. These features found an audience, and only a few exceptions avoid them. Just as wheels gave way to hover cars, some of the friction of older games gave way to modern games' design choices. And yet, part of what playing those games meant could be found precisely in that friction. Full Throttle isn't a manifesto against progress, nor is it a plea for the virtues of old things. It's still, fundamentally, a good story told through a game. But it invites us to think about how some things, no matter how beloved they are, can be replaced by alternatives that are genuinely better for most people. The convenience offered by a new technology is real, and it answers legitimate human desires. We know what we've gained, but it may take us much longer to notice what we've lost. The question is understanding which parts of what is disappearing are worth the effort to preserve, not out of mere attachment, but because of their ability to make us feel alive and capable. How do you feel about a new technology replacing something you used to love? Let me know. If you like this, please hit the like button. If you want more, check my other videos and subscribe. There is new content every Wednesday. I'm Charles, and I truly appreciate your time.